Who was the real Christopher Columbus? Was he the hero we've been taught to admire, or there's more to his story? Welcome back to our channel, the ultimate home for all the history and mystery enthusiasts. Today, we'll look into the dark side of Christopher Columbus, the man credited with discovering the Americas. Are you ready to shatter your textbooks and rethink everything you've been taught? He enslaved the natives. Many of us have learned about Columbus's voyages and his encounters with indigenous people, but what is often left out of the story is his role in enslaving the natives. Columbus saw potential in the labor force of the native populations and forced them into slavery. He used to capture them and ship them back to Europe, particularly to Spain, where they were sold as slaves or presented as exotic items to the Spanish monarchy and nobility. Columbus established the encomienda system, in which he forced the indigenous people, primarily the people of the Caribbean, the Taino civilization, to work on plantations and in mines under the control of the Spanish. This system was incredibly brutal and many natives died from overwork, malnutrition, and disease. The encomienda system led to a massive decline in the Taino population. Before Columbus's arrival, it is estimated that there were over 1 million Taino people living in the Caribbean. However, just 50 years later, their numbers had dwindled to a mere few thousand. This rapid decline was not only due to forced labor but also to the introduction of European diseases, to which the natives had no immunity. Moreover, Columbus's desire for gold drove him to force the native populations to search for the precious metal. Each Taino over the age of 14 was required to collect a specific amount of gold within a set period. Failure to do so resulted in severe punishment, often including the amputation of hands. This merciless approach led to the further decimation of the Taino civilization. Do you still have the heroic image of Columbus in your mind? Well, as we delve deeper, it becomes clear that his actions had catastrophic and long-lasting consequences for the indigenous people he encountered. Exploited women. So, let's talk about another shocking aspect of Columbus's actions that many people don't know about. You see, Columbus's journals reveal a dark secret, the exploitation of women during his time in the Americas. In his journals, Columbus wrote about capturing young girls, some as young as 9 or 10, to be sold into sexual slavery. He even mentioned that these girls were in demand back in Europe. It's hard to wrap our heads around the fact that the same man who is celebrated for his so-called discovery of the Americas was also responsible for such atrocities against women. And it wasn't just Columbus. His men were also complicit in these actions. They would often take advantage of the power dynamics in the colonies, forcing themselves on women and girls without any fear of consequences. This horrifying reality was, unfortunately, a common occurrence during the colonization of the Americas. This disturbing fact is a far cry from the image of a brave explorer we're usually presented with. Brutal torture on Red Indians. Another dark and chilling aspect of Columbus were his interactions with the native populations, specifically the Red Indians, the indigenous people of America. Well, the information ahead might be a bit disturbing, but it's crucial to grasp the full picture of Columbus's legacy. Now, as we know, Columbus and his men were not exactly the peaceful explorers we were taught about in school. In fact, they were known for their extreme cruelty towards the indigenous people they encountered. But just how brutal were they? To maintain control over the native populations, Columbus and his men used some truly horrifying methods of torture and punishment. For example, they would cut off the hands or noses of those who resisted their rule or failed to meet the quotas set by Columbus. Can you imagine the sheer terror these actions must have caused among the natives? But it doesn't stop there. Public hangings and burnings were also common methods of punishment designed to instill fear and assert the dominance of the Spanish over the indigenous people. In some cases, entire villages were wiped out as a result of Columbus's violent retaliation against any perceived resistance. Dark history in Spain. Let's take a trip back to Spain and dig into a lesser-known part of his life before he set sail for the New World. You might be surprised by what we find. So, you might think Columbus was a celebrated figure in Spain, right? Well, not exactly. You see, he faced some serious troubles back in his homeland that tend to be glossed over in history books. For instance, Columbus was known for mistreating his crew members during his voyages, and this behavior didn't go unnoticed. In fact, his actions eventually led to him being stripped of his title as governor of the Indies. Can you believe it? the person who is credited for finding the Americans actually forfeited his position of authority because of his own unethical behavior. It's a way different from the glorified image we're used to. But there's more. Columbus's ambitions often led him to make decisions that were morally questionable, even by the standards of his time. For example, he was involved in the slave trade, amassing a considerable fortune by selling slaves captured during his voyages. This darker aspect of his life is yet another reason to question the honor of Columbus we've been taught. Was he really a hero? Now that we've discussed some of the darker aspects of Christopher Columbus's life and actions, it's time to ask ourselves a big question: was he really a hero? Let's have a little chat about how we should view Columbus in light of these revelations. You see, for generations, we've been taught that Columbus was a brave explorer who discovered the New World, and that his voyages marked the beginning of a new era in history. But as we've uncovered today, the truth is far more complex and, well, darker than that. We've seen how Columbus enslaved the native populations, exploited women, and employed brutal torture methods to maintain control. His actions had devastating consequences for the indigenous people he encountered, and his greed and ambition often led him to make morally questionable decisions. So, where does this leave us? Should we continue to celebrate Columbus as a hero, or should we reconsider his place in history? It's not an easy question to answer, but what we can do is recognize the importance of questioning the narratives we've been taught and seek out the full story behind historical figures like Columbus. By doing so, we can gain a deeper understanding of our past, acknowledge the suffering of those affected by Columbus's actions, and work towards a more honest and accurate representation of history. In conclusion, re-evaluating Christopher Columbus's legacy is essential to understanding the impact of colonization on the indigenous peoples of the Americas. As we continue to learn more about the atrocities committed under his leadership, we must also recognize the resilience of the native communities who survived and continue to preserve their rich cultures and histories. This, in turn, will enable us to foster a more compassionate and just society that acknowledges the mistakes of our ancestors and strives to learn from them. Remember, history is not just about the triumphs and victories, but also the heartaches, injustices, and challenges that have shaped our world. Ultimately, it's up to us to decide how we choose to remember Christopher Columbus and what kind of legacy we allow him to have in our collective memory. So, what do you think? Has learning about the dark side of Columbus changed your perspective on him? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this fascinating and complex historical figure. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more history and mystery content. See you in the next episode, where we'll continue to delve into the hidden stories of the past.